The following is a Comfortably Zoned Radio Network production.
Thank you, Tally Olson. We are back. Lovin' baseball when we were 12 and innocent. My guest is Jerry Feitelberg. How are you, Jerry?
I'm doing well. Thank you for having me on your podcast, and it's always a pleasure to do it.
Oh, it's a pleasure having you. This is kind of a new venture for me. This is a series of interviewing folks who are baseball fanatics, and it's my theory that age 12 is when our passions and innocence come together. Never was I more a baseball fan at age 12 than I have been. I rooted feverishly for the Milwaukee Braves because my Giants had moved. And ironically, my guest this weekend is going to be Billy Bruton's son and grandson.
Nice. From the Milwaukee Braves.
It ties it all together from the Milwaukee Braves. And your memories of when you were 12, you got me by a few years in age. What year was it when you were 12, Jerry?
1951. I turned 13 in November of 51. But I was, for most of the year, 1951, I was 12 for the entire baseball season.
You mentioned turning 13. Obviously, we're both Jewish, and the tradition in Judaism is that once you turn 13, you're a man. Today I am a man. You get bar mitzvahed. And it's always in the back of a child growing up that the last year of childhood basically is age 12. It isn't. Childhood to me has lasted all these 74 years, but I'm another story. You don't necessarily have to grow up, and certainly don't necessarily have to grow old, as Jerry is a testament. Jerry, 82 years old, you've got all your seichel, as if you were 12. And that's well appreciated at the Comfortably Zoned Radio Network. Tell me about your memories of 1951 when you were 12 and innocent.
Yeah, well, my first recollections of baseball came in the 1946 World Series between the Boston Red Sox and the St. Louis Cardinals. I don't remember too much about it, but I do remember that was my first introduction to baseball. I remember the 1947 season when the Yankees won the World Series over the Dodgers, and I remember Joe DiMaggio when he flied out to deep left field to Al Gianfrido for that magnificent catch. You know, he was very disappointed, and he kicked the dirt because the ball didn't go out of the park. And I remember Cookie Lavigetto.
I think it was the only time DiMaggio ever showed emotion on the baseball field.
Yeah,
in all of those years.
Yeah, Cookie Lavigetto broke up Bill Bevan's no-hitter with 2 outs in the 9th inning, and Brooklyn won the game 3-2 that day. But my first real baseball season was 1948, and as a kid growing up in Boston, I was 9 years old. I turned 10 later that year. The Red Sox were in a pennant race with both the Yankees and the Cleveland Indians, and the Braves were in the pennant race with Brooklyn, I think, in New York, in the Giants. And I remember quite well that I was rooting for both teams to go to the World Series. Now, I was very I was very fortunate in I think April I think of 1948. I had an appendicitis attack, and back in those days, it was really pretty bad. I don't know if the appendix ruptured or not. And I went to the hospital, and they had this new drug called penicillin. And I was on penicillin for a week, and that saved my life because I guess it was pretty bad. And and the other thing that happened is that I was held out of school. I can't remember how long. I had a tutor coming over to help me keep up with my studies. I think I was in the 4th grade at the time. But we had a TV set. And the Red Sox were on TV, and the Braves were on TV. I could watch both games, so it was kind of neat.
Wow!
So, well, I was rooting for the Red Sox, and I had for both teams. I was actually rooting for the Braves. The Braves hadn't been in a World Series in 34 years, and the Red Sox had been in the World Series in 1946, but had lost in 7 games to the Cardinals. And the Red Sox were still loaded with talent. And I looked at the roster today. And I said, wow, they were loaded. They had, Bobby Doerr was their second baseman. Vern Stevens, they got in a trade with the St. Louis Browns, was their shortstop. They moved Johnny Pesky over to third base. They had Williams out in left field, Dom DiMaggio in center, Wally Moses in right field. And they tied with the Indians, and it was the first time they had a playoff in the American League. And I think the Indians were going with their ace Gene Bearden, who won 20 games that year, and Joe McCarthy, who had been the Yankee manager back in the heyday of the 30s when they won 4 straight pennants. Now Joe was managing the Red Sox. But, Joe had a little bit of a drinking problem, and he made a decision that rankled Red Sox fans to this day. He had this brilliant young rookie left-hander, Mel Parnell, available to pitch against the Yankees. And I think they were playing in Fenway Park. I'm not sure if it was in Fenway Park in New York. Well, they were playing Cleveland, so it was in Fenway Park. Anyway, he went with the veteran Denny Galehouse, who I think was 8-8 for the year. But Denny was next to last year as a player. He was pretty well on the downside. And, of course, Cleveland won the game and went to the World Series, and they met the Boston Braves in the World Series. And I was hooked. The one game that I went to, I saw the series on TV. The one game that I went to, my cousins had come up from Hartford, Connecticut, and they took me over to Old Braves Field. And I went to see a game. The Braves were playing the old New York Giants. Johnny Stain was pitching for the Braves. And in the first inning, Bob Elliott, who had been the MVP the prior year in 1947, hit a 3-run homer. And Stain kept the Giants at bay. I think they won the game 3-2. And that clinched the pennant for Boston. And it was near the end of the season. So they were 2 games up or 3 games up with 2 to play, whatever it was. But it was near the end of the season when they clinched. And, of course, there were no playoffs in those days. They just went right and played it. And the Indians won the series 4-2. And we didn't know at the time, and no one knew at that time, the Indians haven't won a World Series since then. That was the last time they won a World Series. So it'll be 73 years ago this year. So it's a long. And then, of course, the Red Sox in '49, they went down. They broke my heart in 1949. The Braves fell off. They fell into 4th place or something like that the following year. But the Red Sox were still contending. And they had picked up Al Zarilla I think he played for the Browns, and they picked him up. He was playing right field for them with DiMaggio and Williams, and they had essentially had the same team, good pitching. And they went into New York at the end of the season. They were up 1 game, and they had 2 to play in New York. And what did the Red Sox do? They lost both of them. And as I was a kid, I was listening to the game on radio, and Bertie Tebbetts was the last batter. Tebbets popped up, and the Yankees won the second game 5-3, and they went to the World Series. They played the Dodgers, and I think in that series, it was the only series that the first two games of the series were won by 1-0 scores. So that was back then, and then in 1950,
let me interrupt you for a second. There's an expression, I heard it on the radio, and I don't know if it was a song or whatever that made that popular, but the whole idea is that when we grew up, it was basically getting our baseball through the radio. Could you talk about the experience of being a kid and listening to ball on the radio, where you got to use your imagination and you got to hear word pictures from the announcer? Who was the announcer when you were a kid that you listened to on the radio?
Kurt Gowdy. Kurt Gowdy was the Red Sox. I think Jim Britt did the Braves games, and then I can't remember. Ned Martin was one of the broadcasters, and then Ken Coleman did it. But one of the things I'm going to try and make a distinction between television and radio. Remember back when I was a kid, we used to listen to Jack Benny on the radio, and we used to listen to trying to think of his name. Well, anyway, Fred Allen. Fred Allen. And Fred Allen had all these cast of characters. Jack Benny took his program to TV quite well. It was essentially the same program he was doing on radio. Now he did it with pictures. Fred Allen hated TV. He didn't like the way it worked. So, but he put things in perspective. He said to him, and you're talking about the broadcasters, the baseball broadcasters, creating word pictures for you. Radio is theater of the mind. Television is theater of the mindless. Because you don't need description. It's all out there in front of you. So then, that when you have someone, you have the great broadcasters like Mel Allen, Red Barber, Ernie Harwell, the master of them all, Vin Scully, and their word pictures are phenomenal, just phenomenal. They would describe the game, and you had the feeling that you were sitting right there in the stands with them as the plays are occurring, and it was interesting. And it was kind of disappointing when the first time I went to see a game, where's all the action? Listening to on the radio, you thought there was a lot of action, but there wasn't. Baseball was a very slow-moving game.
But the announcers were able to keep you interested between pitches by describing what was going on, and that was the action. The descriptions were the actions. And
the broadcasters, in between innings, would be selling products. Mel Allen sold more Ballantine beer. He used to say something about it's time for a cold one, a nice cold Ballantine, and all the baseball guys at home would go to the refrigerator and get a Ballantine. So they would drink on the air. I hadn't remembered that. My friend Marty Rose reminded me on a podcast recently that the Mel Allen and other announcers would sample the beer on the air. Here's a nice Bud beer, Ballantine beer, whatever, and they drink up. It was a much more friendly day. Let's put it that way. And the teams, Narragansett beer used to be the beer that was advertised on the Red Sox network. Schaefer beer in New York, Rheingold, Peel's beer. You remember all those? They're all gone. All those brands are gone.
Rheingold had the Mets early on. And they had, in the subways, they had contests for the Rheingold girl. And they put up the pictures, fully clothed, of course, in a nice way. But they were selling the beauty of the Rheingold girls. And I can remember Casey Stengel and the Rheingold girls in a commercial. Yeah.
Well, the other thing too for kids of our age, and my next door neighbors, I had three cousins. They're Harry, Herbie, and Alan Bello living next to me. We had two family house, and then the third cousin lived next door. But they were close. We're all baseball fans. And not only baseball fans, and back in those days, in the early days of TV, they used to broadcast the horse races from the local track, and we used to go in there. We'd have the paper, and in those days, they used to put the racing charts in the paper, and we would go in and we would maybe bet a quarter or something who would win the race, and we used to do that, and we used to talk about the Red Sox. Do all the numbers, all the stats, who had the best record, who was hitting what. We all knew that. And the neat thing for us, but not for the players, was the reserve clause. We knew who was going to be on the team every year. And if a player got traded that we liked, it came as a shock. It's not like today where the players have the upper hand. They have free agency. They move around. I was just looking at some of the salaries from the players from 1948. Some of the guys were making $5,000 a year in 1948. And there are people out here on the West Coast who remember the Pacific Coast Leagues, the Oakland Oaks, and the San Francisco Seals. They were called up
and take a pay cut at that time.
Yeah.
They were paying you more.
They were making more money. They were making more money on the coast. Yeah.
There were guys that refused to go up to the big leagues because life was wonderful in the Pacific Coast League. They traveled by train. They'd be in a city for like 8 days. Beautiful West Coast. You really didn't want to leave. And I understand that. Jerry, how did you get out of Boston without an accent? I listened to you. Your elocution is incredibly great. Where'd that come from?
I'm going to tell you. My folks weren't from Boston. My mother and father were from Hartford, and they didn't have a Boston accent. So maybe that was a factor. But I also like to listen to the radio. And when you listen to the radio and you hear the voices coming out, the people on the radio didn't speak with a Boston accent. They had people from all over the country coming to Boston working on the radio. So I listened to that. Maybe that's where I picked it up. I don't know. Radio was a wonderful thing. And it really stretched your imagination. There are two things that I love to do. One was read, and two was listen to the radio back in the day. We used to at our house in Boston. It was a two-family house, but we lived upstairs, and we had a porch and was screened in. And during the summer, in that hot and humid weather, I used to sleep outside on the porch at night, and I would have a radio with me, and I'd listen to the Red Sox game, and I'd fall asleep. Or during the winter, I'd listen to the hockey games. Fred Cusack was the broadcaster for the Boston Bruins back in the day. Johnny Most did basketball, and I listened to those guys. Most was a little bit older, but Cusack, when I was a kid, I listened to all the hockey games. And Boston is a hockey town. Loved that people sold out hockey for a losing team for years. And basketball, when the Celtics were winning all those championships in the late 50s, early 60s, could barely sell out. But that was a different time. Now they're all sold out. But players weren't making that kind of money. and I had just as an aside, I was covering for Sports Radio Service. I was covering a game a couple of years ago between the Montreal Canadiens and the San Jose Sharks. And I was down in the media lounge having dinner, and I was sitting next to a guy who was from Montreal. And I said, the first game I ever saw was between the Montreal Canadiens and the Boston Bruins at the old Boston Garden. I got to see Maurice Richard play way back when.
The Rockets.
And I asked him, how much do you think I paid to get in? He said, I don't know, a couple bucks. I said, I paid 75 cents to get in. And I sat way up in the stadium, back of the Boston goal. It was, they switched the goals, in the first period, second period, third period. But it was a wonderful view sitting way up there for 75 cents at Boston Garden. Can you imagine that? You can't even think of anything costing 75 cents.
Nothing at the concession stand cost 75 cents.
Oh, no. Of course not. But it was different times. It was different. Things were different. Things weren't that expensive. And it was safe. They weren't always better. Can you tell me what's improved about the sports scene over the years? Everybody's always looking back at the good old days. Pay some homage to what's going on today before I let you go. Well, back in the old days, when you went to the game, and if I went to a Braves game and I was going to see Warren Spahn pitch or Johnny Sain pitch, I knew that they were going to go out and they're going to try and pitch a complete game. In 1948, the year the Braves went to the World Series, Johnny Sain he won 24 games, but he finished 28. He had 28 complete games, I think, in 40 starts. And they went every 4 days. They don't go not now, they go every 5 days, but back then they went every 4 days. Now, guys like Robin Roberts would pitch and make 39 starts and have 26 complete games. And there was no such thing as a closer. And the other thing, there was no DH. The only time that teams employed the shift was against Ted Williams. Lou Boudreau created that, and Williams beat the shift more often than not. But today they shift on every player, and so there's no more bunting. There's no more hit and run. Stolen bases are down. It's just not the same. And either you go to a game, it's walk, strikeout, home run. Walk, strikeout, home run. And you just say, oh, my God, when are they going to put some hits together? But you can't get a hit up the middle anymore. You can't get a bunt. Can't get a hit and run. So, and, of course, you can't crash into the catcher anymore like they used to in the old days. So,
it is indeed hard to respect the game that we're watching now compared to what we watched then. Other than the athletic ability has improved because of diet and training, to say nothing of the extracurricular drugs that are being used here and there. But, Hey, Jerry.
Yeah. Yes, sir.
Thank you so much for sharing the memories of when you were a kid. Really
thank you for having me. I loved it.
Terrific podcast, Comfortably Zoned Radio Network. Jerry Feitelberg, it is always a pleasure.
The street goes both ways, Ralph. It's a pleasure for me, too.
Till we meet again at Nathan's on Webster Street in Alameda. Can't wait for this crap to be over with. See you soon, Jerry. And thank you for listening, everybody. This has been fun. Happy trails.
The proceeding has been a Comfortably Zoned network production. You are advised to keep your dreams wet, your humor dry, your children and grandchildren out of military recruiting offices and off the laps of clerics who wear dresses. Thank you for listening, everyone. Happy trails.